Hello, Tony. I'm delighted to be chatting with such a prolific and best-selling author. How's life in Pembrokeshire, West Wales?
It's very good. And we were all expecting a Storm Anthony today,
Yeah.
45 knot winds, and it never came. Or it passed us by,
Yeah.
which is the best way, isn't it? So we've
It's
got
a
a nice
bonus.
sunny evening in Tudor, Wales.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Well, what is the image behind you? Is that a special painting? Is it
Yeah,
an image off one of your
if I
books?
move out of the way,
Yeah.
you
Oh,
can
Henry
see
VIII.
that's
Henry VIII.
Henry
Yeah.
VIII on the
Yeah.
throne.
And his
So
wives.
I'm kind of standing in for him because he's not available at the moment. It's a
Excellent.
famous picture from Hampton Court, actually.
Okay. I'm just looking at that now. Are these all his wives? Is that the executioner on the left-hand side coming along?
Yeah,
Oliver Cromwell,
and
maybe?
there's all sorts in there. It was one of these composite portraits where they put in whoever was in favor at the time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll do a main focus on your writing. But before we get there, can you tell me what you do to relax? Is it sailing? Do you have your own boat?
Yeah. My wife and I both qualified yacht masters,
Oh,
and we've been sailing for years. And we've got a nice yacht on the river, a quarter of an hour away from our house.
brilliant.
And the only thing is, it takes nearly an hour to get to the sea at Milford Haven from the river.
Yeah.
It's the River Cleddau, and it's a long, wide river.
Yeah.
But we've had enough of sailing around the world now. We're quite happy to potter about on the river.
Relaxing. Do you do a bit of fishing while you're out there?
No, I used to, but what we do as well is kayaking. We've
Oh, yeah.
got a few kayaks in the garage.
Yeah.
And that's quite pleasant on a nice evening.
That sounds very civilized. Going back to your writing, with having so many titles, are you full-time writing every day now? Is that your
Yeah,
main occupation?
yeah. What I do, I don't actually write every day because I've got a system that I developed. I write one book a year.
Yeah.
And I research in the summer or what passes for the summer.
Yeah.
And so I like to visit the actual locations.
Oh, yeah.
And last year, I was visiting Walter Raleigh's house in Sherborne in Dorset, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah.
And the owner of it actually allowed me to go into Walter Raleigh's private study where the public aren't allowed.
Yeah.
And I was able to stand at the window where he would have definitely stood at the window at some point with his pipe, looking out over the deer park.
Yeah.
And I was able to really get a sense of him,
Yeah.
And I've traveled all the way to remote Brittany researching my books following Henry Tudor in exile.
Yeah.
So that in the summer, then it's research, and then I start writing in the autumn.
Yeah.
So next month I start in earnest, and then I write through until the spring when I've got a very good editor, and she has the book for a month or so and puts all the mistakes right. And then it gets published sort of June time generally, and then the whole process starts over again.
It's a brilliant lifestyle.
It's great. I love it. Yeah.
Going on the scene, standing looking out of Walter Raleigh's window, do you think that adds to the authenticity to the writing? You can get a sense.
Can't beat it.
Yeah.
You can't beat it because particularly more than half of my readership is in the United States.
Oh.
And not a lot of them, I mean, a lot of them do come across it, but not a lot of them can visit Walter Raleigh's house, for example, but they're fascinated because of his connection with the early Connollys and things like that. You know what I mean? That I can paint a picture for them and bring it to life in a way that just an ordinary non-fiction book might not be able to do.
You mentioned your editor. Tell me about Priscilla Press. Is this?
Yeah, well, the short version is that I was really pleased to be picked up by commercial publishers.
Yeah.
And I thought, this is it. Now I'll pack in my day job and become a full-time author.
Yeah.
What nobody told me is that for the pleasure of their services, you give them half of your royalties.
Yeah.
And they decide when they pay you your half.
Yeah.
So it's a bit random. You definitely don't get it every month.
Hmm.
And in return, they judiciously do, quite honestly, as little as they can get away with.
I've heard this from so many writers.
If
Exactly
you're
that.
if you're very, very well known, then they'll happily get you on the breakfast television program, launching your book and stuff like that. But if you're somebody like me, forget it. You have to do all of the work, really. And so I spent a couple of years trying to get out of the contracts that I'd signed.
Yeah.
And what I found was that they're brilliant. Well, they're template contracts, aren't they?
Oh, yeah.
They're written to defend the publisher and disadvantage the author who might want to jump ship, you know?
Yeah.
So basically, the problem I had is if your books are selling well, then they don't want to let you go.
Of course, yeah.
And actually, there's a clause in there, which is that they can let you go if your book stops selling. Isn't that good?
That's catch-22, isn't it? Ridiculous.
Yeah, well, if your book stops selling, they'll wave goodbye to you. So
write a rubbish book.
I did actually manage to divorce myself from my publishers and set up Roselli Press as an independent press. They call them indie publishers.
Yeah.
But let me tell you what it gives me: complete control. So if I want to change anything in any of my books, I can do it in 5 minutes and republish it without involving anybody else. But also I get 70% royalties.
Rather than the 10% or half of whatever they decide.
Well, you suddenly get, I don't know, 200 quid paid to you, and you have to work out what that related to and exactly what it was. And so I'd never go back now. I mean, I admire people that are picked up by publishers because it's to their credit. Obviously, publishers are quite discerning. However, what they're surrendering is control. So the publisher decides what the book cover looks like, who edits it and when, and they might even approve the edits, you know, and what goes on the back cover and all that kind of thing. So I've got a trick now, which is whenever I release a new book, I update the other, however many it is, 14 books, and slip a reference to the new book in the back, you see. So the very last thing that you see before you snap the book shut and wipe a tear from your eye is a little one-page advert for my new book. And I couldn't do that if I was with I nearly said so-called commercial publisher. They are commercial, they're a business, aren't they? But so am I as well.
Yeah, I've heard other writers said it almost exactly the same. One writer in particular springs to mind, Ken Stark, a horror writer. He told me he wanted the freedom to do. He's got a series of books like yourselves, and he's given like the first one in a series. He gives it away as a freebie, which no publisher would allow, and that obviously brings in a new audience, for the rest of the series. So
that can work if you're building an audience. Well, I'm in the quite nice position of quite a loyal readership, so that even if I mention to you that I'm starting a new book in September, I'll get emails asking me who it's about and when it's going to be out and stuff like that.
Okay, move on to the main focus then, your books. There's 2 trilogies, Brandon, Tudor, and a tetralogy, Elizabethan, all historical fiction, the title implies that. What is it about the period, the 15th century British history, that compels you to write?
Well, it's interesting that I was born in Pembroke, quite within sight of Pembroke Castle. And that's where Henry Tudor was born. And I started researching Henry Tudor's life. He was the Henry VII, the first Tudor king. And I realized that all the books I was reading were basically textbooks. At the time, there was very little. In fact, I challenge you now to find a really gripping book about the life of Henry Tudor, because there aren't that many around. And when I was gathering all this material, I thought, hang on, I've got enough here for one very thick book, which people can use to stop the piano wobbling or a door stop or something, or a trilogy, which would be he could be born in the first book and come of age in the second book and then become king in the third book. So I always had it in mind that the third book would begin with the Battle of Bosworth. And that's how I ended up going to Brittany, was researching he went to exile from Tenby, which is very close to where I live,
Yeah.
through secret tunnels under the streets, which I went down with my wife,
Yeah.
emerging into Tenby Harbour to catch a ship across to Brittany.
Yeah.
And he was being pursued by the Yorkists, you see.
Oh,
So his
yeah.
life was at stake.
Yeah.
And we found the castle that he actually stayed in, and it had a sign on in French, which I managed to understand from the picture by the side of it, danger falling rocks.
Yeah.
And we climbed up inside the tower, which is like a spiral staircase, and there's a room which is marked Henry Tudor's room, yeah, in French, obviously. Yeah. And it was all thick. My wife said, "Oh, your back is covered with cobwebs," you know. But I was oblivious to it because we were the first people to go in there for ages,
Yeah.
but certainly the first people to travel from Pembroke to actually follow in his footsteps and stand in that tower. And really, like I said with Walter Raleigh, I did that with Henry Tudor as well.
Yeah.
He spent a lot of time in that tower,
I can imagine.
looking out across the countryside, thinking about. He certainly didn't think he was going to be king, but he thought he'd have a crack at it.
Wow. Do you take lots of photographs and things to sort of keep that
Yeah.
memory alive, different
What it is,
angles?
I've got a blog which I call the Writing Desk,
Yeah.
and basically, if anybody goes onto my website, they'll see a link to my blog. And on that blog, I did blog posts for every step of the way, pretty much every couple of days of the voyage, describing leaving Tenby and getting across to Brittany. And there's pictures of me actually at the tower in the forest in remote Brittany.
That's excellent marketing.
So all of that is on my blog.
So tell me how many. I'm going to get very jealous now and stand back in admiration. How many hits do you get on your blog and your website and the podcast as well?
It's kind of run away with itself because I used to think that if anybody visited it at all, that was a good thing.
Yeah.
I can remember being quite pleased that I got into double figures in one day. I checked it this morning, and I'm approaching 1.4 million visitors to my blog.
That's incredible.
My podcasts, I only did 19 podcasts. Between us, they're thinly veiled adverts for my books. No, they've got excerpts from the audiobook editions in them, so it brings it to life a bit because it's fascinating to hear the characters come to life, to hear Henry Tudor actually speak and all the others, you know. But that's had 250,000 downloads.
Wow.
And I don't even know the real figure because it's also on Apple and Spotify and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And you probably know yourself, it's quite tricky to find out how many listeners you've got on all these different platforms. But what it means is that I don't have to spend any money at all on marketing, really. Now, I used to do all these adverts and things like that. But now I think things stand or fall on their merit, you know.
We've got such a loyal fan base as well, and
it's great.
Numbers, that's incredible. It really is.
I love hearing from readers, and the other day I heard from a mother in Connecticut in the USA, and she emailed me to say that I'd somehow managed to reignite her son's interest in reading, and specifically in history, and he's now very keen on studying history. And to think that you could do that from a remote Tudor Wales, all the way across the Atlantic, and there's people, and Australia. I've got quite a good following in Australia because a couple of my books have reached #1 in historical fiction on Amazon Australia. So there's a good, I don't know the figures, but there's a good perhaps 15-20% of my readers are Australian, New Zealand.
That's incredible. That's the reward you get back, isn't it? When you can inspire people from a distance that you'd never heard of.
Well, part of it is the success of Amazon because I was fortunate in that I was an early adopter on Amazon. And when I started, there was nothing like the competition there is now.
6 million titles.
No.
Yeah.
And it's 13. Well, last time I counted, it was 13 countries. It might even be more now.
Yeah, yeah.
But it was at least 13 different currencies and stuff like that. When
Yeah.
when you look at it, it's like Japanese yen
Yeah,
and
yeah.
God knows what else. But I did a book giveaway, and I hoped that they were signed paperbacks, and I hoped that one would be perhaps in Liverpool or somewhere, and one might be in Kent or wherever.
Yeah.
One was in Alaska, and the
Yeah.
other was in Adelaide.
Wow.
It's a fortune.
That's some range, some scope
Fortune.
on
When
postage.
I went to the post office, and they look at me like I'm mad, you know. But no, it's worth it. I think that's the thing.
Yeah, good rewards back. I've known some writers, they've said selling books from Europe now that we've left the EU. It costs a fortune. It costs much more than the book itself.
Oh,
You
tell
know,
me
to be
about
sent a
it.
book, to receive.
What not the only good thing. One of the good things is that there's a lot more people are happy to have an ebook copy now.
Oh yeah, of course.
I
Yeah.
can ping them across an ebook,
Yeah.
and you know, they're reading it within 5 minutes, aren't they?
Yeah.
Whereas if I sent it in the post, it might never
Of
arrive.
course. Yeah, true.
I did get the other text a photograph of somebody's porch in Texas, I think it was,
Yeah.
where I'd sent them a signed book,
Yeah.
and the delivery company had taken a photograph of it and emailed me the picture.
Oh, proof of
Makes the
delivery.
world seem a bit smaller, doesn't it? That's right.
That's the bit, yeah. You know, you mentioned the lack or not much of historical fiction. Is that what you enjoy reading yourself? Historical fiction, Bernard Cornwell, for instance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think C.J. Sanson's one of my favorites.
Yeah, the monk.
And that whole series, I've written them all at least
Brilliant.
twice.
Yeah. Shardley.
And you know, there's a few people. I mean, Hilary Mantel. I was so impressed by Hilary Mantel, and you know, it's a real tragedy that she's no longer with us now.
Yeah.
But I'd actually written 3 chapters of my book Owen, and I was reading the first book of the Wolf Hall trilogy, and I suddenly realised what she'd done. Have you read it yourself?
No, I've seen the television episodes, but not the
what you don't get from the television. That was good, actually. The television adaptation was first rate.
Yeah.
But in the books, she writes in first person present tense. It took me a while to even notice. I didn't even notice. So like everything is happening now, right? So instead of he looked at her, it's he looks at her and sees the sparkle in her eyes or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there's an immediacy of it.
Yeah.
And she writes in first person as well quite often. So it would be, I look at him.
I found that difficult to write.
Oh,
that would take me a while
anyway,
to
what
adjust.
I did, I actually rewrote the whole of Owen. I did written 3 chapters, but I rewrote the 3 chapters again in first person present tense.
Wow.
And it worked because it was something like 10,000 copies in 1 month.
What? Wow.
I know. I had a shocking tax bill.
Oh dear.
I wasn't geared up for that. And I shan't tell you how much I paid in tax, but the good news is that the government does use the money wisely.
Oh, of course, yeah. I'm sure of that. I think
my last book, Penelope, my newest book, I've written that in third person present tense. I always have to think about these things. Yeah. It's very complicated.
It's easy to just do it and analyze it and give it a name.
Oh, God. So Penelope is she, but the tense isn't past tense.
Yeah.
So my editor goes through every sentence, making sure that I've not accidentally slipped into past tense.
Yeah.
But the one I'm writing starting next month, I'm going back to old school again. Past tense, third person, because it's a lot easier.
That's a natural, well, for me anyway, that's a natural way to write. But I see what you mean. The present sense, it gives you a sense of reality. You know, this is happening right now.
It's
real time.
theoretically, it reduces the distance between the reader and the events, because it is, like you say, it's like watching a live football match,
Yeah,
you know
yeah,
what I mean,
yeah,
rather
yeah.
than a recorded one.
Yeah.
And anything can happen because the future hasn't been written yet.
Yeah, of course. Do you know what? It's been a while since I've been to a football match, but I went last year to a game at Anfield, and someone scored at the other end. I couldn't make it out; too far away. And I thought, I'll wait for the replay. My mind was waiting for this replay of the goal. I thought, wait a minute, this is
Well,
live.
it's like concerts now. If you're not careful with the tickets, you can find that you're looking at a big screen because you can't actually see the person on the
That's true.
stage.
That's true. Yeah.
So you're looking at this big screen, you think, hang on, I could watch this on a telly at home.
Be a lot cheaper.
That's right.
Yeah. But the success of the writing, have you been approached by any TV film production company?
Oh, I wish.
Yeah.
There's I keep coming across people that I know that have done this. So Liz Fremantle has recently, well, not recently, last year, been picked up for a television adaptation of her book about Catherine Parr, and she's got the woman, what's her name, Alicia. She's the one that played Tomb Raider. You know,
Oh,
Alicia Vikander.
um,
Is it something like that?
I can't remember.
Vikander. Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to that,
Yeah.
and that's one thing I dream about. But I
Oh.
did look into it, and what you really need to do is what they call a treatment. I don't know if you know about
Oh, yeah,
this.
yeah, yeah,
You need to take your book
yeah,
and then represent it in a way that filmmakers could
yeah.
get excited about it, and that is really hard.
It's harder than
It's
writing
really
a
hard
novel.
to do.
I couldn't, for my novel, I couldn't even write a synopsis. Somebody else had to write it for me.
Would you know, I hate even writing the back copy or
The blurb.
the blurb, because I want to get on with the research for the next one,
Of
quite
course, yeah,
honestly.
yeah.
But at least now we can get AI to do all of that for
Of
us.
course, yeah, yeah.
Perhaps there'll be an AI tool that writes the treatment from your novel.
Do you know
That'd
what? I
be
think
good.
there's a danger of the AI taking over, writing the whole novel, writing the whole film, writing films with a de-age Robert De Niro as a 10-year-old, so nobody gets paid.
Well,
That's the danger.
I tell you something, was that the other day I was trying Chat GPT,
Yeah.
and I typed in, write me a review of my book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Put the title in.
Yeah.
And about a second later, there was the review on the screen. And what it had done is it had gone off,
Yeah.
looked at all the reviews
Yeah.
of my book, picked the most positive bits and put them together in a book review.
Was it a decent review?
Second.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Was it a decent write-up?
Yeah. Oh, it's great. Yeah. In
That's-
fact, I could use a couple of sentences from it to promote my books, but you think, hang on a minute, some of it's not right.
Yeah.
And of course, what they're doing now is they're linking together general AI with the robotics that's going on.
Yeah.
So who knows what's coming next?
Oh, we're living in interesting times, I think.
It is, yeah.
About your writing routine, and you mentioned that you spent the time researching
Yeah.
and spent the time
I
writing.
used to try really hard to write as much as I could every day, and whack my way through the book and really get immersed in it. And that is hard work, as you know. It means it becomes very much a job and starts to become not a chore, but it's a constant treadmill where you're working, writing.
Laborious.
And I thought, hang on a minute. I think it was Stephen King that said, a page a day is a book a year. Yeah. And that's a really powerful thing to start get your head around. So if you can write, people say to me, oh, I could never have the time to write a book. You say, well, could you write one page a day? Well, I probably could, you know.
Yeah.
And so let's say it's 500 words. If you write 500 words a day, even if it all gets cut in the editing and stuff like that, that's enough to move you forward at a decent pace to produce a book a year, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that was my new target. So I'm happy if I do 500 words a day. Yeah. And then if I do more, that means I can have a bit more of a chilled out day the next day.
Reward
or
yourself.
perhaps even go sailing if the weather's good enough, or whatever.
Yeah.
And do you know that works really well?
Hmm.
There's no pressure because I can write 500 words in an hour, and or perhaps it might take me longer. I might play around with ideas and stuff like that. But I have a spreadsheet which is my sort of daily word count when I'm writing, and it's got a very rough outline for each chapter, and I can see then whether I'm slowly falling behind or getting ahead of myself or whatever, and that really works well.
Did you create like a sort of Bible when you're starting a series of novels for your trilogies? For times,
Um,
places, names, dates.
it's
Is that all in the
interesting
spreadsheet?
because there's something a bit unusual about my books in that they follow the continuous thread of the Tudor history
Ah,
from Owen Tudor's first meeting with Queen Catherine of Valois through to the death of Elizabeth I, which is the end of the Tudor dynasty.
yeah,
And so that means that I'm always building on the previous research.
yeah, yeah.
So, for example, when I got to the end of Henry's story, it was his daughter Mary that nursed him on his deathbed, and she was a little girl, and I thought it's a nice image, isn't it? That
Yeah.
his young daughter, actually his son Henry didn't really care very much about nursing him at all, but his daughter did, and I decided, it would make a real change to write about his daughter Mary, who became Queen of France, by the way.
Huh? Yeah.
And Mary Tudor, Queen of France, is often confused with Mary Tudor, that was Queen of England.
Yeah.
But anyway, I didn't know anything about her at all, so that was quite fascinating. And then I started understanding about her husband, Charles Brandon, who's quite a character. He's best known from the Tudors and Henry Cavill. But the real Charles Brandon, I was able to visit his home, and it's pretty much demolished now. It's turned into an old people's home.
Yeah.
It's called Westhorpe, his home. And the owner of the place said, "Oh, they found a load of Tudor bits and bobs in the moat when they drained it. Do you want to come and have a look?" And
Wow.
he had a barn round the corner,
Yeah.
and there was just a heap of Tudor rubble. And I picked up a bit of the it's the frame, the limestone frame around a window.
Yeah.
And he said, "Oh, you can have that if you want."
See ya.
So I've got it as one
Yeah.
of my prized possessions. Is a bit of the it's called a mullioned window. I don't know if you're familiar with the architecture, but basically it's a very heavy, ornate window frame. Then they used to put leaded glass in the actual windows,
Yeah.
But because it's actually from Charles Brandon's house and Mary Tudor's house,
Yeah.
I really felt that closeness again that I was talking about.
Yeah.
And yet again, I realized that people that buy Owen tend to go on and want to know what happened next. So they then buy this next book in the trilogy and then the third book. But then there was nowhere for them to go after that. So Mary continued the story. And I thought, I could make this into a trilogy again if I could think of what the third book would be.
Yeah.
And after Mary died, sadly, Charles Brandon wasted no time in marrying his 14-year-old ward. He'd been he'd bought the wardship of an heiress called Catherine Willoughby, and she became his third wife. So I had Mary, Brandon, and Catherine as my trilogy. And I really enjoyed doing it. There's a lot of overlap in the research. And what I didn't realize was that Catherine could have been the seventh wife of Henry VIII, because he was starting to he was a bit old and decrepit, but he was already thinking of what could happen next. And there's actually a book about Henry's seventh wife. But she was fascinating because she was best friends with Catherine Parr, which is one of the reasons she didn't want to marry Henry.
Yeah.
So she was around at the time of the young Elizabeth and Lady Jane Grey and all of that kind of thing. So there's a wealth of stuff in there that I could have, worked on. But the main thing that was of interest with her was that she lived at a castle called Grimsthorpe in Lincolnshire. I don't know if you've ever been to Lincolnshire. I never had before.
No, I haven't.
I'd never been there before because I live in remote Wales. So
Yeah.
Lincolnshire is like a different. Do you need a passport for Lincolnshire? But
change your currency.
Grimsthorpe Castle is preserved, and you can go into her bedroom in Grimsthorpe Castle, and there's the bed, and there's a portrait of her on the wall and everything like that. So it's another example of how, if you live in this country, we've got so much history around us, and you can just reach out and touch it. It's absolutely amazing.
I think you give me an appetite for more history.
Oh, it's. I tell you what, it's great to actually visit the locations and to, if you know something about it. I found I was telling the tour guide stuff because I'd been studying it so much. I could tell them things that they didn't know about Charles Brandon, for example. And the obvious thing to do then was to just carry on with the story of the Tudors and start thinking about Elizabeth I. Now, she was a strange lady, wasn't she? I could have written one book about Elizabeth I, but it's been done. Lots of people have done that kind of thing. So what I thought I'd do is pick 3 of her favorite men, each of whom saw a very different side of her. So I chose Drake, Essex, and Raleigh. So Drake worshipped her and used to take caskets full of jewels and pearls and diamonds and stuff and kneel at her feet, because he had a bit of a chip on his shoulder because he was a self-made man, really. And then the second book was very different because that was the Earl of Essex, who was like a toy boy. And people say that they were lovers, but in reality, she was more than old enough to be his mother. And she treated him like the son she never had, you see. But he actually rebelled against her. So the book is called Essex Tudor Rebel. And spoiler alert, she had his head cut off at the end.
Oh dear, oh dear.
Yes.
I know in the film portrayal, Wessex, he was portrayed by Errol Flynn in the film back in the 1940s, flirting with the Queen.
I mentioned about the third book, Raleigh, that I really enjoyed researching Raleigh because he was the Queen's captain of the guard. So he was like an employee, really. And so he saw yet a different side of her again. And I could have left it there as a trilogy, but what I decided to do then is to write about 3 of the Queen's ladies. They're not necessarily our favorite ladies, but they're all hugely important ladies that almost nobody knows anything about. And the first of those is my new book, Penelope, which is about Lady Penelope Devereux. And she almost disappears from the pages of history. Most people have never heard of her, but she was hugely influential. And in fact, the biggest thing that she did was corresponded with Anne of Denmark, the wife of King James of Scotland at the time, about if you do decide to come down here and be the new queen, then you can rely on me to see you right, sort of thing. Hugely dangerous job to do, because if anybody had known about it, she could have been thrown in the tower. To even talk about the death of the Queen was treason. And I mean, she was getting a bit. She was 50 odd, wasn't she? So
that's old in those days. Yes.
No, seriously. I was just intrigued by all of this, and of course, I'd already studied her life because she is the elder sister of Robert Devereux, who's the Earl of Essex. You see, that I was talking about before. So I'd already written a whole book about her brother. So it was really quite a simple matter to make the step to talk about his sister instead. And it's doing really well. I'm pleased to say that without me doing anything, it became a Amazon hot new release in the United States.
That's brilliant.
So that's great, isn't it? I really like it. It's great talking to you, and I really like communicating with readers and stuff like that. So I'm happy anytime to talk about any of this. I mean, if people have got questions about publishing, and if they've got a great idea for a book and how do they get that published, I can talk about the tools that I use. In the old days, it was a major job to format an ebook. Do you know how long it takes now? About 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Using Vellum, I use Vellum, and it imports the Word document and exports it as a perfectly formatted ebook and paperback and hardback.
I'm going to look into that myself. It is just a bit, yeah. But before the time runs out, I'd like to say thank you very much, and let's keep in touch. And I'm going to hold you to that if you don't mind. I'll send you another invite in the near future.
Well, I'm starting to write is it 15th book? I lose count now.
That many?
I think it's 15th, and I've got 2 more. The other two that I'm thinking of. So after I've written that, I've got 1 more in the Elizabethan series, and then I've got another idea for a book to follow on from that. So it just goes on, really, like me.
That's all. But the clock's caught up with us. It's going to run out any second. So let's thank you very much. Really enjoyed it.
I'd like to thank you. Yeah, thank you for your time. And you've made it very easy, because I feel like we're just sitting in the pub.
We are.
All we haven't got is a pint in your hand.
I've got 4 cans in the fridge now.
Oh, there we are.
Yeah.
But no, anytime. And if anybody wants to check out my books, my website is tonyriches.com. And actually, it's quite nice to be able to tell people, if they type in Tony Riches into Amazon, up I come.
It comes up. I'm going to put the links to your website and all the links on there.
There we are. There we are. And like I said, all my travels in Brittany and stuff like that are on my blog as well. So they'll find those easy enough.
I'll put a link to that as well. Thank you, Tony. You have a good rest of the weekend. Appreciate this.
Thank you. Cheers.